Hey guys, or maybe it's just guy, well, gal. Yeah, sorry about the hassle kind of getting here. It's been a little bit of a schlep, but here I am. And so, yeah, we're going to be dealing with Van Gogh letters 81, right? I'm not actually even sure quite where we are in the whole thing. And I think, in a way, we need to just view some of what we've sort of gone through already. So I think just to orient ourselves, we are going to briefly go through some of the letters we've already gone through, and then we'll kind of find our footing. Chelsea, good to see you. Michelle, Sharon, Drury. Sorry about postponing this by 2 hours. I was very tempted to actually call it off. I'm really, really tired, and the last video I did just has been a monster to edit, and it's actually still not finished. So kind of exhausted, kind of a bit stale, but I just sort of feel like I really need to get this show back on the road. Lynn, Lippy, Wendy, Kathy, good to see you guys. So I'm going to show you guys some, I think, beautiful photos in the whole spirit of Team Peachtree, but I think we need to get going. So I'm going to move on to this letter. 24th of April. You may remember we were actually on the chronology not that long ago, and then unfortunately it got a little bit away from us. But let's see if we can go through as much of May today as we can. So you may remember in this letter in late April, Vincent made some huge disclosures to his brother. He said things like, the power of thought is coming back to me gradually. Now bear in mind, this is 4 months after the year incident, right? 4 months later, he is still trying to recover his sensibility. So I think what you realize is just how traumatic that had to have been. And he had actually been hiding that away. He'd been hiding the true nature of how devastated he felt, how traumatized he felt, how unbalanced he felt, how much he was teetering, I guess, on his own sort of psychological rope, if that's the word. He says here, I am absent-minded and could not direct my own life just now. Right? These are some of the first and only admissions he makes of major difficulties he has in kind of keeping it together, right? And then after saying that, he says, let's leave that alone as much as possible. He's kind of saying to his brother, let's not dwell on that. You know, I'm telling you this, I'm admitting this, I'm acknowledging this, but let's not make that the focus of what's going on, you know. And instead he says, how are you? You know, how are things going with you? And just think about how doubly devastating this is, in the sense that his brother is getting married. His brother is going to have a child. His brother has gone on honeymoon. His brother is blissfully in love. And it couldn't have happened at a worse time for Vincent. So literally what's kind of going on is, when Vincent kind of finds himself at his lowest ebb, it's when his brother, suddenly fortune favors his brother, and suddenly his brother's, for the first time in many years, his brother's suddenly preoccupied with a great love affair, and a very important person has come into the lives of not only Theo but also Vincent. She's going to actually preserve both their legacies, but specifically Vincent's. She's a very important figure in the story. And Theo has this brief, think about it, you know, Theo is also not got very long to live. It's 1889, and by the end of 1890, early 1891, Theo's going to be dead as well. So this is actually Theo's sort of one and only springtime of his life in a sense as well. And if you bear that in mind, you kind of can't really begrudge him his happiness, and it would be fleeting, and it would be pretty final. Once the year was over, he would lose his brother, and shortly after that, he would lose his own mind as well. People don't really realize that Theo also kind of lost his marbles. Theo also went to an asylum. Theo also died. Well, not also. Theo died in an asylum, as far as I know. And Van Gogh, to his credit, scraped the wherewithal to get himself out the asylum. He sort of felt like, I can't be here anymore, kind of thing. Mel Stiller, Yvonne, good to see you guys. Okay, so let's go on with this letter. He says, how are things at home? I think mother must have been pleased. What do you think that's about? Right? It's about Theo's outrageous fortune. It's about Theo finding a respectable woman. Mother must be pleased about that. Mother must also be not very pleased about Vincent on the other side of France, kind of up to no good, whoring, literally. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say, while his brother is getting married to a good woman, the other brother is whoring around and causing chaos and being kicked out of town and making a disgrace, being a disgrace to the family. Then he says, kind of coming back to what he's saying, he says, I assure you I'm much calmer now. And he says, I can tell myself that you have a companion for good. Do not imagine that I'm unhappy. And of course he is unhappy. He's not in a happy place. His whole world has fallen apart. He's lost Gauguin. He's losing the Yellow House. He's going to lose. He's going to be kicked out of all. I think unhappy is a kind word. He's utterly devastated, utterly broken, completely miserable, and anyone would be. And so again, you're dealing with somebody who can put on a brave face, put it that way. Although he can communicate quite honestly what he's going through, he's also someone that's quite resilient, quite tough, and can kind of hold a lot in. Yari says, I feel deeply that this has been at work within me for a long time, a very long time, and that other people seeing symptoms of mental derangement have naturally had apprehensions better founded than my unfounded certainty that I was thinking normally, which is not the case. So he's admitting here, I've got a screw loose. I'm not thinking normally. I've kind of been a little deranged for a while. What's going on? And I think the answer is it's advanced syphilis that's starting to have an impact. It's not helping him that he doesn't eat very well. It's not helping him that he's working himself to the bone. It's not helping him that he is so unsuccessful as an artist. It's not helping him that he occasionally abuses absinthe. It's not helping him that he gets drunk and sleeps with the cheapest prostitutes who are also the most diseased, I guess. And so he gets, he's kind of getting infected in that sense. He says that has much softened many of the judgments which I have too often passed, with more or less presumption on people who nevertheless were wishing me well. And so he says, it's a pity that with me these reflections reach the stage of feeling rather late. It's almost like he's saying, wow, I'm a little bit sad, I'm a little bit disappointed that I'm only thinking critically about what's going on with me now. Wow, couldn't I have figured this out a little bit earlier? Like, I'm me. Why has it taken me this long to figure out what's going on with me? And he says, it is not as if I were 20 since I've turned 36. And that is a factor. He's not a young man anymore, but by the same token, because he's 36, because he's a bachelor, I mean, if he had gotten married earlier, he probably wouldn't have gotten syphilis to the extent that he did. He wouldn't have, he would have had, probably someone would have taken care of him, would have made sure that he ate 3 square meals and that he didn't work as hard, etc., etc. But maybe we wouldn't have inherited the Van Gogh that we have. Then he says, I think it would be torture for other people as well as for myself if I were to leave the hospital. He's basically saying, if I leave the hospital, it's going to be torture to other people. I'm going to be putting other people through torture. And then he says, I feel paralyzed when it comes to acting and shifting for myself. And then he talks about a couple of other things, right? He says, there remains the idea of an association of painters. He's still holding on to the dream of the yellow house, the studio in the south. And he says, it is a deplorable and melancholy failure. And, so not that long ago, he was saying, I don't imagine that I'm unhappy. And then a couple of lines later, this is a deplorable and melancholy failure, right? He is absolutely devastated, and anyone would be. You lose your home, you lose your community, you lose your control over your life, control arguably even over his mind. You lose basically, in a sense, your future. I mean, that year was supposed to be this great opportunity, to exhibit. I mean, for an artist, something like the World Fair, for an artist that's trying to make his mark, something like the World Fair is a huge opportunity, right? And he's just, whether he shot himself in the foot or someone else shot him in the foot, he's in a situation where he's basically everything is being flushed down the drain. That the whole World Fair is like a ship that is floating off into the sunset, out of his reach. He's not going to be able to go there, and so it is a wonderful opportunity that is just going to be missed, and it's devastating, right? And so he continues to make appeals. Can we do this? He says, Ray warns me about Saint-Rémy, that it is as well as to remember that a good many of the patients are fairly well off, and some of them spend a lot of money, which often does them more harm than good. I can well believe it. So he says here, I must send you my collection of pictures before going to Saint-Rémy, right? And so what's kind of going on here is he's preparing to go to an asylum. He's not saying, how dare you? He's not saying there's nothing wrong with me. He's not saying I refuse to go. He's saying, you know what? I've realized something serious is wrong. I'm deranged. I need, I've got to do this. I need to recover. And there's some sanity in that, right? There's some sanity in the fact that, I mean, if somebody said to you, you could interpret it two ways. You need to go to a hospital because you've got some mental health problems, or you need to go to the madhouse because you kind of a nutter. Most of us, I think, would be quite resistant to that. Would be like, I think there's another way we can deal with this. Maybe I can just kind of, hang out at home and read a couple of self-help books. I don't think I need to go to the madhouse kind of thing. And yet he does. But bear in mind, he's kind of got not that many options. The villagers have said, we don't want you here. It's not as though he can just find somewhere else to stay. He's got to leave the town anyway, and he doesn't really have money to look after himself, right? So that then takes us to the next letter. And you may remember this letter. We did deal with this letter. This is from Theo to Vincent, and Theo says, I was so touched by your letter, which we received, me and Joe received. Now you must remember, Joe is actually a newcomer in all this, and Joe is getting a sense of who Theo's brother is, not in the middle of the story, not at the end of the story, but quite early on. She's getting a sense that Theo's got a brother that's a very unusual guy, and some very unusual things are going on with him, and he's an artist. And this is what Theo says at this terrible time of Vincent's life. He says, you have repaid me many times over, right? And you can imagine that Vincent feels incredibly guilty. You can imagine that his self-esteem is very low, in the sense that his brother's given him so much money, keeps giving him money, and he feels he's in debt to his brother. He feels it's a debt that he can never repay. And his brother offers this incredibly generous gesture by saying, you don't owe me anything. My brother, you do not owe me anything. You've repaid me many times over by your work, as well as by your friendship, which is of greater value than all the money I shall ever possess. What an incredible statement. What a incredibly generous gesture. I know, right? And if you think about it, what Theo's saying is going to prove to be incredibly portentous, in the sense that Theo is saying your work has greater value than all the money I'll ever possess. Theo's got no idea how true that's going to be. That the work of his brother, which no one is buying, which no one is interested in, which no one can understand, which people are scoffing at in the here and now, one day is going to be exhibited in some of the most prestigious art galleries in the world, in skyscrapers in Manhattan. And people are going to go there in throngs, and all of them are going to crowd around his paintings over 100 years after his death. And people are going to stand and just stare. Or it's almost like paparazzi, but for his art. And it's like the stampede for his art, whereas now there's like not a single person who cares. In fact, it's the opposite. They're trying to kick him out of town. And yet his brother says, not only is your work more valuable than all the money I'm ever going to possess, but also you are. Your friendship is of greater value than all the money I possess. I don't mind giving you money. You know, your friendship means a lot to me. And then he goes on to say, isn't this really a beautiful gesture, very kind gesture from someone who's quite otherwise, in a way, preoccupied with his own life, in a sense? I mean, how preoccupied wouldn't you be if you were getting married? I met someone in Colorado whose son was graduating, and she was very preoccupied with that, and she wasn't really able. There was certain things she wanted to do and we wanted to do, but she just couldn't get round to it because of those commitments. Theo's got the same commitments, and yet is able to make the time to write these letters, yet is able to concentrate and think about his brother, right? And to be fair, he's also sort of not done that. There have been periods where Vincent's just not heard from his brother at all. And then he says this, it is very painful for me to know that you are still in an imperfect state of health, which is kind of a euphemism. You know, would you call the condition that Van Gogh is in an imperfect state of health. I mean, an imperfect state of health could be I'm not getting enough sleep. An imperfect state of health could be I'm eating a lot of chocolates or um, drinking a lot of coffee. This is kind of a mild, a kind description for what's really going on. It's very painful for me to know that you are still basically going crazy. He says, though it seems to me that nothing in your letter betrays a weakness of the mind. And so, this is kind of like what I'm getting at. I'm kind of I don't know if the word is an apologist for Vincent van Gogh, but I'm certainly someone who's campaigning for a different Van Gogh than the Van Gogh that most of the world believe him to be, right? Most of the world believe Van Gogh to be a mad artist, a tortured artist, someone who's so crazy that he cut off his own ear, someone who was so troubled that he then committed suicide, right? If he was so crazy and so troubled and so depressed, now would be the perfect time to do that when his brother's not there for him, when his brother's a million miles away, and where his brother's not going to be visiting him anytime soon. Why would he do that a year later when his brother was just around the corner, where he was seeing his brother every other weekend, where he was part of, in a way, the family? He was going to lunch with them. They were coming to visit him and having breakfast with him. Things were much better a year later. His art was going better. He was part of a little community. So why would he do something like that then, when now he's in a far more precarious position? He's utterly alone. He's a broken person. His mind is broken. His body is broken. Why wouldn't he do it now? Right? And so the point I'm trying to make is even his brother says nothing in your letter betrays a weakness of the mind. His brother is basically saying, I'm not really that worried because you seem to me to maybe your health is not perfect, to put it mildly, but you seem to be, and there he says exactly what I've been saying. The fact that you deem it necessary to go to a sanatorium is in itself rather serious. Let's hope that this is meant only as a preventative measure. And I think that's another way of him saying, the fact that you want to do this shows that you can appreciate what's going on with you. You've got at least that self-awareness, right? You've got that self-awareness. And what I've been saying all along, and I'm sure you guys have sort of noticed that and felt that confirmed over and over again, is Vincent is incredibly eloquent, incredibly lucid, incredibly, what's the word, effective in his communication, in his letters. It's not like he goes so crazy that his handwriting kind of starts squiggling like this. I mean, I think his letters are far more sound than Brian Laundrie's, right? Vincent's letters are far more integrated and cohesive and sensible than, for example, Brian Laundrie's. At least Vincent's got a pretty good grasp of reality, and he can express himself at length in a way that's sensible. And anyway, so his brother goes on to say, seeing that I know you well enough to consider you capable, he says, I know you well enough to consider you capable of all imaginable sacrifices. And, that's not a little comment. That's not flattery. Theo has seen his brother in the Borinage. He's seen his brother basically in the most destitute of conditions, but on purpose. His brother wanting this hard life where it's cold, and he sketches on a piece of paper and then sets fire to it to keep himself warm, where his brother's giving his clothes away, where his brother has literally no money and is going down into the coal mines with those people, right? He knows his brother is capable of um, enduring extreme hardship, right? And hence, he says, I consider you capable of all imaginable sacrifices. But then he says, I've been contemplating the possibility that you have thought of the solution in order to inconvenience less those who know you. And so, in the middle of Van Gogh's um, crisis, in the middle of this terrible trauma that he's going through, his brother's thinking, wow, I actually think you don't want to be an inconvenience to me. You don't want to perhaps embarrass Joe. You don't want to kind of end up on our doorstep right now. You probably do want to, but you sort of realize, I can't do this to my brother. And so there you have it. This is your solution in order to not inconvenience those who know you. And that's also quite a kind, indirect way of telling his brother something that is true, but in a way that's not kind of on the chin. And so even Theo is a very um, eloquent and quite clever writer, intelligent writer. And look at what he says after that. He says, if this should be the case, if this is what you're doing, that you trying not to inconvenience us, he says, I implore you not to do it. For life in such an establishment can hardly be pleasant. So you should know well what you're going to do. And so Theo's aware of his brother's toughness, but he's also aware of his brother's goodness. And he's saying, ultimately you must decide, right? He's saying, if you're going to do this, it's not going to be easy in this asylum. And then he says this, you ought to consider whether you should perhaps try something else first. And so his brother offers these options. He said, you might come here for some time, right? And you can imagine, if Theo's being honest, if Theo kind of looks into the mirror, that's the last thing Theo or any newly married couple would want. The last thing any married couple would want is anyone, but also a family member moving in on like day one of the marriage or week one of the marriage, right? It's going to cause stress for everybody. It's going to add a dimension of tension to the marriage at a very early period, right? And not only that, it's going to put a bit of a blight on the marriage, because it's supposed to be a time of joy, a time of discovery, a time of fun and all that. And now you've got this sort of basket case staying with you. And even so, and this just shows you what kind of character Theo is. The first thing he says is, you could come here for some time. I'm inviting you. You don't have to go to the asylum. You can come here. I know you don't want to inconvenience us. You're not inconveniencing us. You are, but it's fine, right? You can come here for some time. And then he says, or you could go to Port Alvin during the summer, or you might go and board with people who would take care of you. He's offering him other options. He's saying you could do this, number one, number two, number three, number four, or you could go to the asylum. He's saying, don't make Saint-Rémy your first choice. Consider other options. And then he says this, if there was no hidden meaning in what you said, and what's quite interesting with that is I've often said, and haven't we often agreed, that sometimes in his writing he seems to be quite cryptic, that he sometimes speaks in symbolic ways, that he refers to certain things and things in certain ways, right? And so his brother says, you know what, if there was no hidden meaning in what you said, then I think you are quite right in going to Saint-Rémy. By staying there for some time, you will be able to regain confidence in your strength. And what ultimately happens? Exactly that. That is exactly what happens. He does go there. At this point, I think he's thinking, I'm going to go there for 3 months. He ends up going there for 4 times longer, for an entire year. And I think that gives you a sense of the condition that is in. His condition is far more serious than perhaps anyone realizes, even him, even Vincent. By staying there for some time, you'll be able to regain confidence, and nothing will prevent you from returning to Ol after a certain lapse of time if you should feel the inclination. And so he's thinking, Theo's saying, you can return to Ol whenever you want to, and that isn't what happens. Anyway, he says, Monsieur Saul sent me some prospectuses of the Saint-Rémy establishment, and he says that a third person should apply for admission. So I enclosed the letter to the director of the establishment, which you may use as you think fit. So he basically gives this letter of admission to Theo. Theo gives it to Vincent, basically says, you can use it or not. It's your prerogative. He doesn't send it to a doctor. He doesn't send it to the police. He doesn't send it to the mayor. He says, I'm giving it to you. You decide what you want to do. And then he talks about what's going on at home. Mother is growing younger. She's very happy. Joe's happy. The apartment looks more lived in. The wedding gave her a lot of pleasure. So while Vincent has been going through all of this trauma, his brother had a wedding. The family were at the wedding. Friends were at the wedding. They ate wedding cake. Vincent missed all of that, right? And then he talks a bit about Joe, and he says, she has such a foundation of goodwill and of zeal for doing the right thing that I'm no longer afraid of the disillusions which I feared before our marriage. Anyway, we've actually dealt with this letter before. Let's go on to the 25th of April, Vincent to Theo. And this is Vincent's response to Theo, basically saying, you've got other options. You can come here, you can go there, but maybe the asylum is the right idea, right? And so this is what Vincent says. Thanks for your kind letter. It gave me great pleasure that mother looks as if she were growing younger. And then he says, her mind will be running on seeing you with a child. That is dead certain. So there's a little bit of humor there. You know, she's not going to stop harping on, okay, when you're going to have a baby? Are you going to have a baby? You know, what's going on? And then he says, I very much regret for your sake and your wife's too that you are not living in Ville d'Avray, for instance, instead of in Paris. And then, so he doesn't start off unloading his problems and his burdens. He starts off in a polite way, and it just shows you he does have self-possession. He does have some, what's the word? He's an educated person with social graces, right? That hasn't just gone out the window. It's not like he's completely lost his shit. It's just that something's going on where he's not completely in control of himself, but he can write pretty well executed letters. Then he goes on in the third paragraph, he eventually deals with it. He says, I went to see Monsieur Sauls and I took your letter. That's the letter of application, I guess, for the director of the asylum at Saint-Rémy, and he's going there today. And so I hope it will be fixed up by the end of the week. And so this is all about to happen. Those wheels are starting to turn. And he says, for myself, I shouldn't be unhappy or discontented if sometime from now I could enlist in the Foreign Legion for 5 years. And so he's basically saying, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I might join the army. I'm going to go to this place, and after that, I don't know. Then he says, from the physical point of view, my health is better. Anyway, I couldn't say that we must or can do this without consideration and consulting a doctor. He says, naturally, I can always do painting or drawing as long as it will work. And so, again, you know, however compromised he still wants to paint, he still wants to draw. I mean, you can't imagine he's that sick or mad or deranged if he still wants to paint. It's not, whatever is going on with him is not undermining him so much that he's completely dysfunctional, right? And then he describes in quite clear symbolic language what he's experiencing, and it's quite incredible. He says, here it is. Sometimes, just as the waves pound against the sullen, hopeless cliffs. And I think when he says that, what he means is me repeatedly going out on these sorties, going out into the landscape, painting, coming back, finishing the painting, going out again. It's like waves. And all these efforts at painting and painting and painting and painting are like waves pounding against the hopeless cliffs. The hopeless cliffs are almost the society is faced with. This sort of sullen wall of people who won't smile, won't understand, won't look at his work, won't give an inch, but basically are just ignoring him, isolating him, misunderstanding him, right? Do you guys agree with that analogy? And he says, I feel a tempest of desire to embrace something, right? And he's kind of saying, I feel really alone. I want to be anchored to someone. I want to be attached to someone. I want a woman. You know, it's almost like he's saying, Theo, I like what you've done here. It's almost like he's recognizing, Theo, you know what you have? I want to be taken care of. I want to love someone. I want someone to love me. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a supermodel. It's okay if she's a domestic hen type. By the way, when I took my father for a belated Father's Day lunch, I took Timmy along as well, and a chicken kind of trotted by. Timmy got pretty excited. Anyway, he says, we must take this for what it is, the effect of hysterical overexcitement rather than a vision of actual reality. That's how he thinks of his condition. Hysterical overexcitement is almost how you would think of someone who's drunk, almost how you think of someone who's overworked and can't sleep, right? Then he says, Ray and I have laughed about it sometimes, for he says that love is a microbe too. And then he goes on and talks about all of that stuff. And then he also says, oh, my dear Thea, if you just saw the olives now, the leaves, old silver and silver turning green against the blue, even in the midst of this terrible crisis that he's in, he can still see the beauty around him. He can still feel the fresh flush of nature. You can still see the orange-colored plowed earth. He says it is something quite different from your idea of it in the north, the tender beauty, the distinction. He talks about the pollard willows of our Dutch meadows. You know, in the middle of all of this, he's reminiscing, not about a person. He's reminiscing about trees, about meadows, about dunes, about olive groves, about, he says, the rustle of an olive grove as something very secret in it and immensely old. And, you know, when I went to Aal, you kind of, it's kind of a, especially coming, I come from the New World, right? America is also part of the New World. But so is places like Australia and South Africa and New Zealand. That's the New World. And so when you come from a place like that and you go to a place like Aal and you see something and it's like, what what is that thing? And it's a Roman Colosseum, like 1,000 years old. That building is 3 times older than the pretty much the history of my country, right? There's not a single building in my country that is as old as this one building, right? And so before it became this French country, it was part of another civilization, the Roman civilization. And then there are all these Roman artifacts, one of them being this Colosseum in the middle of Arles. And he's right when he talks about you walk around and suddenly you realize, wow, where I am now is immensely old. There's history in the dirt, in the rocks, in the trees, right? And he says, it is too beautiful for us to dare to paint it or be able to imagine it, right? And again, it's quite incredible. In the middle of this exquisite anguish and travails and travesty and tragedy, he is almost overcome by how beautiful his surroundings are. It's almost like he's almost heartbroken by the beauty around him that he can almost not touch, and he doesn't dare paint. Thanks so much, Robbie Robin. Appreciate it. He also says the oleander, that speaks of love and is beautiful like the Lesbos of Puvista Shavans with women on the seashore. He's certainly not lost his libido in the middle of this health crisis. When I was in Myrtle Beach, we were eating waffles and there were oleanders blowing, big oleanders blowing in pink and white, blowing in the wind next to our tables. He says, but the olive is different. If you want to compare it to something, it is Delacroix. And then he says, I'm going to end this letter. I wanted to talk to you about lots of things, but my ideas are not orderly. And so he's even got the presence of mind to go, okay, I need to stop here. I'm not going to ramble. I'm going to end here. I can feel I'm losing my concentration. And then he goes on and he writes quite a bit more. And so let's go on to the next letter. I hope we're going to get to May quite soon. 29th of May. This is from Dr. Peyron to Theo. It's a short letter. He says, yesterday, Mr. Swords, the Protestant minister, handed me your letter, which is at the same time a request for admission for your brother, Paint in All. He also told me the conditions that you want for your patient during his stay in the house. Among these conditions, there are some that will be a pleasure to grant him, but there's one I cannot accept in advance, and that is of granting him permission to walk out of the establishment anytime he wants. And so, in a very real sense, Vincent is voluntarily giving up his freedom. He is going to be a prisoner. Someone is going to be in charge of him, is going to say, no, you can't go out. No, you can't go out. He says, you will understand, I hope, that under these conditions, my responsibility would be strongly compromised since I could not watch over him. What I can assure you in advance is that I have observed your patient for some time, and I've acquired the certainty that he can enjoy a greater liberty without inconveniences, and I will be the first to grant it to him. So he says, after I've observed him, if I feel that he, I don't want to say deserves it, but if I feel that he, what's the word that I'm looking for, qualifies, then he will be allowed greater freedom, right? And I know it's kind of jumping the gun a little bit, I know it's jumping the gun a little bit, but that is exactly what happens. He's in the asylum, and Peyron does say you can go beyond, you can go out beyond the grounds. You can go out and paint and come back. And you know what that is telling you? The same thing we've been saying. Helena, good to see you back here as well. Welcome. Do you know what that is saying? It's saying, you might say, Nick, I think you have a soft spot for Van Gogh. I think you're a little bit biased. I think Vincent is also biased because it's him. I think Theo's also biased because it's his brother. Well, one person who wouldn't be biased is the guy running the asylum, because he would basically say, I can't let you run around. You could cause all sorts of bullshit, and then I'm going to be in trouble. And so the fact that the um, the dude running the asylum, Peyron, basically decides, wow, okay, you kind of okay. I'm going to let you be on. He's giving Van Gogh, in a way, a fairly clean bill of health, saying you're not fucked up, you're not um, totally nuts. In fact, compared to the people here, we're going to give you a lot more freedom. Compared to the people here, you can do that and that. You're going to have additional privileges that they can't have. Now, I think if you had to present this scenario to the average person and say, um, in a madhouse, do you think if you had to put Vincent van Gogh into a madhouse, the guy that cut off his ear, the guy that would later commit suicide, if you had to put him into a madhouse, where do you think he would rank amongst the nutters? Would he be the least nutty, the sort of average nutcase, or would he be like one of the raving lunatics there? And it's kind of an interesting question, but the answer is, certainly from Peyron's perspective, and we're going to see this play out, is that he's one of the most functional people in this asylum, if not the most functional, right? That's the first point to make. The other point to make is that's a little bit of an oversimplification, because his condition fluctuates. There are times that he's like a raving lunatic. There are times that he wants to eat his paint. There are times where he can't paint and he has some serious, not sure what you want to call it. What did he call it? I think he calls it episodes. But he also has periods where he's almost like paralyzed. And so it's not to say that he goes to the asylum and he's the star there and he emerges unscathed. Something is going on with him. Something is eating at him, right? But the other side of it is, he's not someone who's just lost his marbles, right? Deborah says, I've never heard much about the guy running Saint-Rémy. Well, this is his letter, and his name's Peyron, right? There you can see it is Dr. Peyron. And so he goes on to say, in terms of the painting, now you can also imagine Peyron could have been, we say in Afrikaans, die vark in die verhaal, which means the pig in the story. He could have been the sort of roadblock to Van Gogh. He could have said, the problem is your art. You're never going to sell your art. You need to stop painting, and we need to get you back to reality. We're going to confiscate your paints, and if that had happened, and it could have happened, then you would never have had this, right? And this came about, Starry Night came about in the asylum. You could just have as well have had a dude there who was an arsehole, kind of saying, we need our patients to be calm, and your art is, like even when you paint, you're kind of going like this, and maybe part of how you're going to be rehabilitated is we just need to take your art away, right? He could have done that, and then bye-bye Starry Night. And this is what he says about the art. He says, As for doing painting and not to be sequestered in the establishment, I promise you that we will facilitate every means to allow him his natural tastes, and in the house allow him the greatest liberty compatible with his mental state. And you can imagine that this would be of great concern not only to Theo but also to Vincent. In the same way, we'll grant him wine with all his meals. So that was quite a big demand. It's like, okay, he'll go to the asylum, but he wants wine with every meal. Tells you a little bit about Van Gogh's predilections, doesn't it? Good point, Yvonne. I agree with you. And then he says, I must tell you that in these conditions, the price of the pension remains fixed at 100 francs a month. It's actually quite expensive. And that it would be impossible for me to make a reduction. I have to add that you will have to pay just for the first month a supplement of 10 francs for the medical certificate. Blah, blah, blah. Medical treatment is given with the same solicitude for all classes of patients. I must ask you to give me his birth certificate at the time of admission. As for his clothing requirements needed to maintain the cleanliness, I've fixed this up with shawls. And so basically, Van Gogh has been set up for admission to the asylum of Saint-Rémy. And when does he enter the asylum? Well, pretty much now in May. And so this is a letter from Vincent to Wilhelmina, and he says the following. Your letter affected me above all because I learned from it that you have returned in order to nurse Mademoiselle Duquesne. Bria would be able to pronounce that. So I think his sister's kind of working as a au pair, kind of a nurse. Anyway, he says, cancer is a terrible disease. As for me, I always tremble when I see a case of it. And this is no rare occurrence in the South. That is often not the real incurable and mortal cancer, but cancerous tumors. I think it very brave of you, sister, not to shrink from this Gethsemane. Now, again, consider how thoughtful, articulate, colorful, considerate Van Gogh is when he writes to his sister. He doesn't write to his sister in the exact same way as he writes to his brother. He is aware of what's going on in his sister's life, and his letter is specific to her and to that and to who she is. And then he says, I feel I'm less brave than you when I think of something, for I feel there he even is quite honest with her. He says, I feel clumsy, unwieldy, awkward in their presence. If my memory does not deceive me, we have a Dutch proverb bearing on this. They are not the worst fruits that wasps gnaw at. And then he says, this leads me straight to what I wanted to say. The ivy loves the old branchless willow. Every spring the ivy loves the trunk of the old oak tree. And in the same way, cancer, that mysterious plant, so often fastens on people whose lives were nothing but love and devotion. And in a weird way, Van Gogh is kind of, he doesn't maybe know this, but he's actually intuiting what's going on with himself. He doesn't have cancer, but he has a kind of affliction that is similar to cancer, something that can go into remission, something that can ebb and flow, something that is inside of him that is eating him alive. And that's syphilis, right? There's something that is taking root in his body that is causing serious damage to him, like cancer. It's not cancer, it's something else. It's a potent bacterial infection. Of course, if you had it today, it wouldn't be such a big deal because medical science knows how to deal with it. But in that time, it was basically a death sentence. It could be a death sentence. Then he says, however terrible the mystery of these sufferings may be, yet there is in reality something sweet and pathetically touching about it, which is the same effect as seeing the abundant growth of green moss on the old thatched roof. All the same, I know nothing about it and haven't the right to assert anything. It's quite a thoughtful musing from someone who's lost their marbles, from someone who's about to go to an asylum. It's not like he's saying to his sister, I don't know what to do. My life is over. woe is me, I can't paint, I've lost complete control of my life, instead he's musing about plants and moss. He's got quite a strong presence of mind, right? Then he says, not far from here is an old tomb, much older than Christ's sepulchre. And I think I've been to it. I've been to the tombs in all, Roman tombs. And anyway, it says, bearing the following inscription: Blessed be Thebe, daughter of Telui, priestess of Osiris, who never complained of anyone. I could not help thinking of this when you told me that the patient you are nursing never complains. And I think he admires that, and I think he aspires to that as well. He says, Mother will doubtless be pleased with Thea's marriage, and he writes that she seems to be getting younger in appearance. Again, he's aware of other people's lives, other people's experiences. He's not like so wrapped up in his own difficulties that he can't think of anybody else. He talks about Theo is very contented. He feels reassured. He has very few illusions. He talks about Theo's strength of mind. And he says, my brother's quite right for this. He's right to be married to this person. And then he says, and then again, he takes about 5 paragraphs before he really deals with the elephant in the room. And he says, as for myself, I'm going to an asylum in Saint-Rémy. Now, you must remember, it really is the elephant in the room because he's writing to his sister, and his sister was at Theo's wedding. And his sister and his mother and everyone would have said, Theo, what the fuck's going on with Vincent? Why is he not here? What is going on with him? And Theo would have said, something pretty serious has happened. There was some kind of ear incident, and there was a big drama with Gorgan. Let's not talk about it right now, but things are really bad with Vincent. And so that's the elephant in the room. And yeah, he's talking about it to his sister. He says, I'm going to an asylum in Saint-Rémy, not far from here, for 3 months. That's what at this point, that's what he thought was going to happen. I'm going to go there for 3 months, and then I'm going to be okay. Well, guess what? After 6 months, he wouldn't be okay. After 9 months, he wouldn't be okay. After 12 months, he would feel, I think I'm ready to leave. And then he expands on this, and he says, I have had in all 4 great crises, during which I didn't in the least know what I said, what I wanted, and what I did. It's kind of saying that I almost lost consciousness, that I was raving in some way, that I was doing something that I wasn't aware of. He says, not taking into account that I previously had 3 fainting fits without any plausible reason and without retaining the slightest remembrance of what I felt. And there is a link between the use of absinthe and this kind of loss of consciousness. And one area that I think is probably worth researching and worth investigating is, what link could there be between neurosyphilis or advanced syphilis and getting drunk on absinthe? If you put the two together, what could happen? What could go wrong? Or what can you imagine? Yeah, so it absolutely is blackouts. And so he's going to have more and more blackouts. And so if you want to say, cut through the bullshit, what are we actually talking about here? What is actually going on with Vincent? You say he's not mad. Then what is he? Well, the answer is he's having a lot of blackouts. And anybody who is blacking out is going to feel like there's something wrong with me. Like I just pass out. I can't remember what's happening. I don't have control kind of over not just my mind, my body. I'm doing something, and then I wake up and I've blacked out. And anyone's going to be really unnerved by that. But does that mean you're mad? right? Does that mean you're mad? You follow my reasoning? And so he goes on to say, this is him. There's no better source on what's going on with Vincent van Gogh than Vincent van Gogh. He's telling you what he's experiencing. He's not saying, I'm struggling to keep my thoughts kind of rational, or that I'm struggling with paranoia, or that I'm struggling with hallucinations, or that I'm struggling with madness, for the lack of a better word. It's basically saying I'm passing out, right? And I don't remember. Then he says, well, this is bad enough. The fact is that I've been much calmer since then, and I am perfectly well physically. I still feel incapable of taking a new studio. Notwithstanding this, I'm working and I've just finished 2 pictures of the hospital, one of a ward, a very long ward, with rows of beds with white curtains in which some figures of patients are moving. So in the midst of this so-called madness, he continues painting. People who are properly mad, people who are screwed up, can't paint, or if they do paint, it's going to be incoherent. His paintings are very coherent. His writings are very coherent. I don't know how many times I've said that, but I can never oversay it. Anyway, he goes on to say, I painted walls and ceilings with big beams, all in white, lilac white or green white. Here and there, a window with a pink or bright green curtain, the floor paved with red bricks, at the end of a door with a crucifix. Look at this detail, right? He's also not lost his ability to think in detail, to remember in detail. He's not suffering from kind of everyday amnesia, but he is suffering from a little bit of his thought process is compromised in a certain way. He says it is all very, very simple. Then he says, he talks about an arcaded gallery, blah blah blah, and then he goes on to say, I'm not going to go through this. He says, I read a little in order to meditate all the more. So that's, besides painting and writing letters, is also reading. He says, it is very probable that I shall have to suffer a great deal yet. And I think that is also an incredible statement. He's absolutely right. He's going to, even though he's saying, I'm going to be in the asylum for 3 months, he will be in the asylum for a year. He is going to suffer for a great deal. And then he says, to tell the honest truth, this does not suit me at all. I don't want a martyr's career. And isn't that another way of saying, I don't want to commit suicide. I'm not going to commit suicide for my art. Isn't that a way of saying, I'm not trying to suffer. I'm not trying to make my life harder than it needs to be. I want to be happy. Why is YouTube rejecting my comment? He says, under no circumstances do I long for a martyr's career. What do you think he means by that? I don't think it's, yeah, well, actually, I do agree with you. It is a bit ironic coming from him, but he's kind of saying, I don't want to suffer more than I have to right now, which is a bit of a statement of intent. He says, I have always sought something different from heroism. And that's quite an important self-disclosure. It's quite an important statement about who he thinks he is. He's not trying to be a hero, right? He's not trying to be a hero. He says, that's a trait I admire in others, but I tell you again, I consider neither my duty nor my ideal. And then he talks about books by Renan and how often I think of them. Here we have olive trees and other plants and the blue sky. Oh, how right Renan is, and how beautiful that work of his, in which he speaks to us in a French that nobody else speaks. He says, a French that contains in the sound of the words the blue sky, the soft rustling of the olive trees, and finally 1,000 true and explanatory things which give his history the character of a resurrection. Um, what's quite funny is I watched a YouTube video, excuse me, I watched a YouTube video about George Lucas's wooden dialogue, and it was so incredible as a storyteller myself. Um, him saying that I'm not trying to wow you with what I'm saying. I'm actually trying to use words that are going to have a almost poetic quality. I'm not trying to wow you with cleverly crafted dialogue. I'm trying to use words that are going to almost be a kind of music. It's the sound of the words, not what the words are. I found that incredible. When you actually go through some examples of it, it really is quite incredible. And as bad as the dialogue is, and as bad as the dialogue you could argue from George Lucas is, it's some of the most memorable lines in movie history, right? Some of George Lucas's dialogue is some of the most famous and memeable dialogue that is out there. And so, if it's not particularly what's the word, impressive on paper, it certainly is powerful and potent in terms of that aspect, that it's trying to tie in with powerful tropes about heroes and kind of mythologies. And it's quite interesting where he talks about the sound of words here, the sound of words in terms of the blue sky, the rustling of olive trees. Anyway, it goes on to, I hope I haven't bored you going down that tangent, but he says, one of the saddest things I know is that prejudice of people who, in their self conceit, oppose so many good and beautiful things which were created in our own time, are the eternal ignorance, the eternal misunderstandings, and how much good it does one to come across a word which is really serene. I do wonder whether he means consciously or subconsciously, directly or indirectly, explicitly or tacitly, whether he is referring to his own art. He says, people, the prejudice of people who oppose good and beautiful things created in our own time. Well, what about his art? Maybe he's not consciously thinking about that, but I can't help thinking about that. Anyway, it goes on, blessed be Thebe, daughter of Telui, priestess of Osiris, who never complained of anyone. As for me, I'm rather often uneasy in my mind because I think that my life has not been calm enough, all those bitter disappointments. And here he is speaking from the heart. I've had so many bitter disappointments in my life, so many adversities. Changes keep me from developing fully and naturally in my artistic career. This is a big speed bump that he's faced right now. It's preventing him, and I think this is one of the hardest pills for him to swallow. Is he was just coming online. He was just kind of coming on song, right? He was like just warming up as an artist. He was just finding his feet, getting a feel, um, getting into that state of flow, right? When he lost it, right? I don't know if you guys remember when we were dealing with those letters, and he was gaining in confidence, and he was actually afraid of Gorgan arriving because he felt like, I've found myself. This is what I want to do. I don't want to be told what to do. I've found my way to it. And what can be more frustrating than finding your way, finding your voice, only to have it taken away at that very moment of incredible discovery? And was and has been and is an incredible discovery. A new way of looking at the world, a new, fresh perspective, meaningful perspective of this energized landscape. A landscape described through color in the context of the advent of photography and how he describes that color. He goes on to say, a rolling stone gathers no moss, they say, don't they? But what does it matter, seeing that, as the above mentioned Father Pangloss proves all by himself? I don't know how to say that. Kutava pour les midans les milieux des mondes, whatever that means. Shall we check what that means? What does that mean? Translate. Anyone know what that means? Anyone from Canada here? Everything is going well in the best of all possible worlds. Okay. Last year I did 10 or a dozen orchards in bloom, and this year I've done only 4. So the work doesn't go very vigorously. Well, that's not bad. He's, in terms of the entire year, the previous year he did 10 or a dozen orchards. So far he's done about half of that, or possibly a third. It's not that bad. I mean, he's lost his ear. His life has been pretty chaotic. He's still done a fair amount of work. He says, if you have the book by Drone, which you speak about, I should like very much to read it. So is this guy so mad that he can't do anything? He's even asking his sister to send him a book. Can you send that book for me? I'd like to read it. You know what? Last year I painted so many paintings. This year I only painted so many. It's not like someone who's totally lost their grasp of what's going on, right? And then he says, I've seen very interesting nuns here, but the majority of the priests seem to be in a wretched state. I've been so afraid of religion for many years. For instance, do you happen to know that love may not exist in the way people imagine? The resident physician here, the worthiest man you could possibly imagine, the most devoted, courageous, warm, and manly heart, amuses himself now and then by mystifying the good women here by telling them that love is a microbe. And when, on hearing this, the good woman and even some men raise a loud outcry, he doesn't care a rap and remains unperturbable on this point. And as regards kissing, all the other things we like to do in addition, these are only actions of a natural order, like drinking a glass of water or eating a slice of bread. Certainly kissing is rather indispensable, otherwise serious disorders might result. Now, must the intellectual sympathies always go with or without what went on previously? Why regulate all this? What is the good of it? As far as I'm concerned, I won't dispute that love is a microbe. A little bit of humor in this letter. He's not so far gone that he can't come to me. Come. He's not so far gone that he can't meander into a little bit of levity, right? A little bit of light-hearted subject matter. He's certainly not struggling with self-pity, right? And so he says, notwithstanding that this would not prevent one from feeling like respect in the face of the sufferings caused by cancer, for instance. And look here, the doctors who you say cannot do very much now and then, which you are at liberty to say as often as you think proper, very well, but do you know what they can do nevertheless? And that's a very real thing. That was a very real thing in 1889, that you'd have doctors, but the doctors didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't really know what they were dealing with. Germs had just really been discovered, I think. And anyway, he says they can press your hand more cordially and more gently than many other people can, and their presence may at times be very sympathetic and reassuring. Look here, very often I let myself talk on, and yet I cannot write 2 lines. He says, I cannot write 2 lines, but he's just written 200 lines. He says, I am much afraid that this time too my ideas are futile and incoherent. So in a way, he's comparing himself to a doctor that can't really diagnose what's going on. He's saying, I can't really say what's going on with me, which is, if you think about it, quite a smart analogy and quite a true one. He says, only in any case, I wanted to write you a letter which you would receive while you're there. I'm unable to describe exactly what is the matter with me. Does that mean he's mad? I mean, there's no, I don't think they appreciated at that stage exactly what syphilis was. I think they were starting to get an idea that there was something going on. But I don't think they knew it as a bacterial infection. I'm just trying to, let's have a quick look at when was bacteria recognized. Bacteria. When do you think bacteria was discovered? Any thoughts on that? So actually it was discovered more than 200 years before this period, but I'm not quite sure when it became well known, I guess, is the right way of thinking about it. The father of bacteria, the father of bacteriology, anyone know? Louis Pasteur. When did he come into the whole picture? And the answer is, anyone know? He died in 1895, which is 6 years after Vincent's writing these letters. So basically, the beginnings, the first steps to understand bacteria are basically being made at this time that Vincent is sick. Right? Do you follow? So it's just beginning the consciousness of this sort of medical what's the word, medical reality is becoming, just starting to become known really at about this time. But it's effectively too late for Vincent. It's too late for Theo. They don't know how to treat it. In fact, I think Dr. Gachet basically says you should keep working. Don't, keep working. That's how you should deal with it. There you have it. Valerie, good to see you here as well. Okay. Well, it's quite a long letter, but we're near the end of it. He says, now he again describes what's going on with him. He says, there are horrible fits of anxiety. So he's kind of having panic attacks, right? So some of it is no doubt trauma from what he's been through. Some of it is probably pure blackouts. Some of it is probably paranoia about those blackouts and concern about his life and his future. And then he can't sleep, and then fits of anxiety, panic attacks. And then he talks about a feeling of emptiness and fatigue in the head, right? Well, yes, he's exhausted. He's psychologically exhausted. That's why he feels that way. The fact that he can actually say that shows that he's really, in possession of his, still in possession of his faculties. Of course, they're going to go backwards some degree over the next couple of weeks. He goes on to say, I look upon the whole thing as a simple accident. There can be no doubt that much of this is my own fault. What do you think he's talking about when he says that? When he says the whole thing is a simple accident, do you think he's talking about himself cutting his ear off, or someone else cutting his ear off, or the place that he finds himself in? And when he says it's an accident, but a lot of it's my own fault, well, he's aggravated it through whoring around and drinking a lot and getting overexcited, I guess, right? He goes on to say, I have attacks of melancholy and atrocious remorse, right? That's very different to what he said to Theo. To Theo said, do not imagine me unhappy. Yeah, he says, I have attacks of melancholy and of atrocious remorse. But the fact is that when all this discourages me and gives me spleen, I'm not ashamed to tell myself that the remorse and all the other things that are wrong might possibly be caused by microbes too. So he's got a bit of a sense of humor about that as well. And there he talks about suicide. It's a rare reference. He says, every day I take the remedy which the incomparable Dickens prescribes against suicide. Right? In other words, he's saying, every day I'm giving myself something to not do that. Wow, it's quite weird. YouTube won't really let me post this comment. Anyway, it says, every day I take the remedy. I'll just post that. And he says, the remedy is a glass of wine, a piece of bread with cheese and a pipe of tobacco. It's kind of small comforts. He says, it's not complicated. It's a little bit of joy in my day. I have a glass of wine. I've been beaten by what life's thrown at me. I've lost my ear. I've lost my friend. I've lost my house. I've lost my place in this town. I've lost my life in a way. I'm experiencing a social death. I guess I've got to pick up the pieces. So I guess I'll have a glass of wine and I'll get a piece of bread and I'll smoke my pipe and I'll slowly build up my life again from scratch. He says, this is not complicated. You will tell me, and you will hardly be able to believe that this is the limit to which melancholy will take me. All the same, at some moments, oh dear me. If anything, he's making a couple of hints. He's saying, I really am pushed to the edge of what I can take, right? And then he says, well, it is not always pleasant, but I do my best not to forget altogether how to make contemptuous fun of it. I try to avoid everything that has any connection with heroism or martyrdom. In short, I do my best not to take lugubrious things lugubriously. Lugubrious. Looking or sounding sad and dismal. Now, I wish you good night and my kind regards to your patient. I do not know her. All yours, Vincent. I do not know whether Lies is at Soesterberg at the moment. If she is there, remember me most kindly to her. This letter was written in French. And that takes us into this letter from Vincent to Theo, April 30th, while it's taking us forever to get into May. Anyway, he says, my dear Theo, on the occasion of the 1st of May, this was Theo's birthday, and he remembers it, right? He's not so robbed of his senses that he can't remember Theo's birthday, and it really does seem as though Theo missed Vincent's birthday, Vincent's 36th birthday. He says, I wish you a tolerably good year and above all good health. How I should like to pass on to you some of my physical strength. I have the feeling I have too much of it at the moment. It's quite a big statement, which does not prevent my head from still not being all that it should be. So he's saying, I feel strong, but there's still something going on with my mind. How right Delacroix was, who lived on bread and wine alone, and who succeeded in finding a way of life in keeping with his vocation. But the inevitable question of money is ever present. Delacroix had private means, Corot too, and Malay. Malay was a peasant and the son of a peasant. You may perhaps be interested in reading this article I cut out of a Marseille paper because one catches a glimpse of Monticelli in it, and I find the description of the painting representing a corner of the churchyard very interesting. But alas, it's yet another deplorable story. How sad it is to think that a painter who succeeds, if only in part, pulls along half a dozen artists who are worse failures than himself. However, remember Pangloss, remember Bouvard et Pécuchet. I do, and even that becomes clear then. But perhaps those people don't know Pangloss, or else fatally marked by real despair and great suffering. They've forgotten all they knew about him. And anyway, we are falling back again in the name of optimism on a religion that strikes me as the rear end of some sort of Buddhism. No harm in that, on the contrary, if that's what one wants. I don't like the article on Monet in the Figaro very much. So there's a newspaper article on his contemporary Monet. So Monet is doing very well. He's in the newspaper, and he says, I don't really like that article. He says how much better that other article in that was. One could see the pictures in that, and this one is full of nothing but depressing banalities. Today I'm stuck in the middle of packing a case of pictures and studies. So this is what he's doing on the last day of April. He's packing up his life. He's packing up his pictures and his clothing. He says, I've stuck some newspapers onto one which is flaking. It's one of the best. And I think that when you've had a look at it, you'll understand more clearly what my studio, now come to grief, could have been. So he's saying, if you just look at my art, you'll understand to what extent my studio has come to grief. This study, just like some of the others, was spoiled by the damp while I was ill. And so in a way, the painting being spoiled is in a real sense an analogy for Van Gogh himself starting to go down like a downhill or downward spiral. He's starting kind of a downward trajectory. He's going to, whatever heights he's achieved as an artist, he's about to paint Starry Night, but beyond that, he's going to start to unravel, right? In the same way that a painting can be spoiled by damp. Earlier today, I've got some big canvases on the other side of my monitors here on the ground against the wall. Photos that I blew up onto big canvases, and Timmy jumped up against them. Fortunately, not with muddy paws, but it's kind of a way that big, beautiful canvases can be damaged, can be dirtied. It's the same kind of thing. And in a weird way, Van Gogh himself is being damaged. His ability to see the world and to express it is being contaminated by kind of what's going on with him. And it is a shame. What if the ear incident didn't happen? Well, then I think we may not have had that period in Auvers-sur-Oise, But it does make one wonder, what if Van Gogh had lived another 10 years or another 20 years? Anyway, it goes on to say, that was a blow to me, since not only the studio had come to grief, but even the studies that would have been reminders of it. It is also final. So he's experiencing a terrible sense of death and finality and destruction. And he talks about my urge to found something very simple but lasting was so strong. I was fighting a losing battle, or rather, it was a weakness of character on my part, for I'm left with feelings of deep remorse about it, difficult to describe. What do you think he's remorseful about? Do you think he is sorry that he challenged Gauguin as much as he did? Do you think he maybe fell in love with a prostitute? And so did Gauguin, and they had an argument about that. What weakness of character is he talking about? Do you think he got drunk once or twice too often? I think that was the reason I cried out so much during the attacks. I wanted to defend myself, and I couldn't do it. And that's quite interesting, is when he was having these panic attacks, his anxiety attacks, He says, I wanted to defend myself. In this delirium, he was shouting out, trying to defend himself, and he was crying out. Well, wasn't he having flashbacks of what Gauguin may have done to him? For it was not to me, it was precisely to painters such as the poor wretch about whom the enclosed article speaks that the studio could have been of use. In fact, we have several predecessors. Brouillard at Montpellier gave a whole fortune to that, a whole life, and without the slightest apparent result. Yes, a chilly room in the municipal gallery where you can see a troubled face in many fine pictures, where you certainly feel moved, but alas, moved as in a graveyard. Yet it would be difficult to walk through a graveyard that demonstrated more clearly the existence of that espérance which Pourville de Chavannes has painted. Pictures fade like flowers. Even some of Delacroix's have suffered in the same way, and Van Gogh's would as well. He says, he talks about purplish blue and pictures fading there and whatever. And he says, what are we? We are the painters. Oh, well, I'm sure Richepin is quite right. For instance, when he brutally bursts in and consigns them straight back to the madhouse with his profanities. That's the thought that's going on in his mind, straight back to the madhouse. I assure you that I know of no hospital where they would be willing to take me in for nothing, even supposing that I myself shouldered the painting expenses and left the whole of my work to the hospital. So he's thinking of, could I not paint as a way of paying for me staying in a hospital, which is quite an ambitious thing for an artist who's never really sold any art. So he certainly hasn't lost his self belief. He says, and that is, I don't say a great, but still a small injustice. Even so, I should feel resigned if one took me in. And there he talks again of suicide. He says, if I were without your friendship, they would drive me remorselessly to that, right? There he basically makes a declaration. If I were without your friendship, um, I think he means all of these injustices would drive me to that. And he says, coward that I am, I should end by committing it. But basically he's saying, without your friendship, I might do that. But he never loses Theo's friendship. He says, at this point, I hope we are permitted to protest against society and to defend ourselves. It's almost two letters back to back that he's made these very rare references to that. He says, we can be fairly sure that the Marseille artist who did that, that's another reference, in no way did it under the influence of absinthe. It's quite interesting that he thinks about it in context to absinthe, because he himself has been perhaps ruined by absinthe. I mean, he often paints absinthe. Absinthe is a very, very powerful um, kind of form of alcohol, which is was taken off the market, I think, around about 1910. Some people committed terrible crimes that they couldn't remember while on absinthe. Is it possible that Van Gogh was on absinthe and attacked Gauguin in some kind of raving way, and Gauguin simply defended himself? Of course, it's possible. He says, for the simple reason that no one is likely to have offered him any and could not have had anything to buy it with. Then he says, Monsieur Sauls has been sent to Saint-Rémy. They're not willing to give me permission to paint outside the institution, should be yet. The picture behind me, obviously, is exactly what he did. He painted outside the asylum. It's a beautiful painting. Let me show you a kind of a bigger version of that, if I can find it. Maybe I can do it like this. Beautiful picture, isn't it? And quite a lot of detail. There's a lady there with a, some people might call it a parasol, right? There's two people walking over there, and there's some dude over here, and there's another guy, and um, there's something almost like the sea in the foreground. So it's almost like he's painting the foreground like it's moving. And there's something equally animated about these trees. Look at these bushes. They seem to be blowing or billowing. And it's picturesque. You know, behind all of this is this building. And he paints the windows and he paints the roof. And all in all, it's um, quite a gay proportion picture. There's something about the way these trees whirl upward and dominate this asylum, where there's almost a sense that life and nature is bigger than our human troubles. I don't know if that's what he's trying to express, trying to give proportion to what he's going through. He goes on to say, you know, they don't want to let me paint outside the institution. He says, this is pretty bad news. This is going to be crushing. You can imagine a guy who goes out every single day into the landscape, who feels the electricity of the sun on the leaves, the rippling of the grass. You know, one day when I was driving with JC in Boulder, we took a right turn, and there was this beautiful, and this is early spring grass, quite long grass, quite luxurious, deep green in a field, a fence between the road and the field, and it was rippling, just this rippling carpet. And I think I left my phone at home, or I just thought, well, we can take a picture of it when I get back. And of course, you never do. You never recapture that moment. A little bit further on, the same sunshine was whispering through these. I think it was either maple or oak leaves, but those leaves seem to be liquid sunlight. They seem to be sparkling, almost like sunshine on water. And again, I wanted to record that, and I just didn't. And if I had been driving, I probably would have stopped and we would have done it. We did stop there later on, but that effect had passed. It wasn't like that anymore. The moment had come and gone. Again, he talks about, if I could get out of this mess, and that's him calling a spade a spade. That's how he thinks about it. I joined the Foreign Legion for 5 years, and I'd prefer that. It's almost like he's saying, I'd rather go to the army for 5 years than the madhouse for 3 months. He's saying, I can't stand the idea of being locked up. I might not be allowed to work. I might find it hard to get better in this situation. He says, on the other hand, I could go to the Foreign Legion and they would pay me 100 francs a month during the whole long life of a madman. He says, it's a bad business, but what are we to make of it? But would they be willing to have me as a soldier? I feel very tired after the conversation with Monsieur Sauls, and I don't quite know what to do. I myself advised Bernard to do his service there, so it's hardly surprising that I'm considering going to Arabia as a soldier myself. This also gives you a sense of Van Gogh's assessment of himself. Is he really so sick? Is he really so weak if he's thinking of becoming a soldier? I mean, he is saying, I don't know if they would take me given the condition I'm in, but it's not as though he thinks he's on his last legs. He's really in a situation where he knows he doesn't have many options. He's been kicked out of his home, he's been kicked out of the town, and it's basically a situation of, where do I go? Where can I go that I'm going to not be, that I'm going to be at least inconvenience? And this is kind of the answer. And guess what? It's going to be something of an inconvenience to him. anyone being in a situation where you deprived of your liberty, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't come and go as you please, you can't go and watch a movie, is not going to be a terribly happy camper. Yvonne says going to the asylum was the right call. He goes, supposing I'm only allowed to work under supervision, you can imagine that being a pretty horrible cross to bear. He says, and in the institution, my God, is it worth paying money for that? In that case, I should certainly work just as well, even better in the barracks. Anyway, I'm thinking about it. You do so as well. Let us remember that all is for the best in the best of all worlds. It's not impossible. So you really are getting a sense that he is feeling really beat down. He does use the S word a couple of times. And if there's a time for him to feel that way, it's now. He's giving up his freedom, he's giving up his life. His brother is far away, his brother is very happy. Other painters are in the newspaper. Things couldn't be worse. And yet he kind of has a bit of a take it on the chin attitude. He's like, well, let's see how this goes. And let's see, are we going to be into the month of May now? 2nd of May. Letter from Vincent to Theo All, 2nd of May. I wonder when he arrives at the asylum. All, 2nd of May. All, 3rd of May. Saint-Rémy, 8th of May. So about a week later, he's in Saint-Rémy. So I wonder if that's not a good place to stop. We had an hour and 41 minutes. My voice, my throat is a little bit hoarse. What do you guys think? I think that's maybe a good place to stop. I do want to show you guys 3 or 4 photos that I took in Myrtle Beach. It's actually North Myrtle Beach. Good point. Good point. He actually had pretty strong self-esteem, or maybe the better word is self-belief, right? So I want to share with you about 4 photos I took in Myrtle Beach of the light, essentially. And so this is one of them. Before I show it to you, how many of you are watching this on your televisions? Because this is the kind of thing you really do want to see on the big screen. Is anyone here watching on television? It's a pleasure, Lynn Lippy. Thanks, Michelle. Michelle, you've been here kind of from the beginning, right? Is Jody still here? Valerie says, I have a 20-inch screen. Okay, well, it's the kind of thing you want to see on a TV, but maybe you can still appreciate the kind of epicness of what you're about to see. Are you ready? I hope I haven't oversold it. And what really made this morning so beautiful, besides the light, and it's kind of Team Peachtree colors, isn't it? It's quite orange. Is look how orange this sky is. look how orange this is. Was the ocean. The ocean was almost as calm as a lake. The ocean was so incredibly calm. You don't often see the sea as this quite almost like liquid mercury carpet, liquid mercury steely surface. And I think this was I think the date of this image is the 11th of June, only about a week ago. And the very next day, I went for a run on the beach, and the sea was incredibly rough. There were waves about as tall as I was, and you can't really believe that one day it looked like this, and the very next day it was really stormy. And so sea can be quite temperamental. Anyway, that is one image. Here's another one. Okay, not that one. We've seen that one. I think is it this one? And this image is of a pier that is unusually made of wood. And there's a guy over here who's kind of walking in front of me with I think a metal detector. I waited for him to walk between these poles so I could sort of hide him away. But I really like this picture because of the kind of symmetry, but also just the way the light kisses the water, the reflections of the water. This part I really like. Well, not with the guy in it. Just these textures, the horizontal lines and the vertical lines, the horizontal lines and the vertical lines, and then the wash of color and texture between all of it. Just a whole series of horizontal lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines, little vertical lines, right? And I obviously walked a lot closer to it. Another part of this that I really like is this light that's on over here. It's quite special, right? This look at the sky through here. It's like a painting, isn't it? I mean, even the wood is like a painting. Thanks so much, Yvonne. I appreciate it. Thank you. This picture had, sorry, not this picture. This structure had a really special significance for me because in my first week in Myrtle Beach, I would run on the beach and I'd run closer and closer to the structure. It was quite a long run from where I was starting from, and so this was like my finish line or the point that I was trying to reach. And on the very last day of the first week or so that I was in Myrtle Beach, I decided I'm going to run up to this pier. Do you think Do you think that I managed to get to it? What do you guys think? So on my very last day, I decided I'm gonna make sure that I get there this time. I'm gonna. Do you think that I did? What do you guys think happened? Absolutely, yeah. And so what happened was I was running towards it, and my left calf just started paining, and I was like, no big deal. It's just hurting a little bit. And it hurt more and more. And eventually I had to stop running. And then I thought, well, I'll just walk the rest of the way. And eventually walking hurt. And eventually it was like, the pier's over there, but I just can't reach it. I really want to reach it. I just can't reach it. And I actually had quite a serious calf injury. I was limping for around about a week. It was quite a serious injury I got just trying to run to this pier. I couldn't get there. I couldn't even walk there. And as I say, I ended up injuring myself and being hurt for at least a week. I think it was even longer than a week. I hurt my calf. And so, what was quite incredible was when I came back to Myrtle Beach, I had no intention of running to the pier. In fact, I actually thought, I don't know if I can run. I've hurt my foot now, and I don't know how my calf is. And I was just going to go for a walk on the beach, and I felt, wow, I actually feel well. The surface of the beach is really solid, and it's a really nice morning. And I just started running. I hadn't planned it. I just started running, and the further I ran, the more I felt, wow, I actually feel quite good. And I ended up running all the way to this pier without even trying. Like I was running and I was like, well, the pier's over there and I actually feel quite good. Maybe I should run a bit further. And I ended up running right to the pier without even trying. And the first time I tried, got hurt, stopped, walked a bit further, and felt like I can't do it. And I'd really hurt myself. When I came back, I could do it effortlessly. And the next day, I also didn't plan to run to it, and I ended up running to it the next day as well. And then ended up running to it, I think, 3 times out of 3 times. And I think at the time I put something on Instagram where I said, you must choose your wave. Don't force it. You need to kind of go with the flow sometimes. And it's just incredible that I had this really strong mind over matter when perhaps it was even too strong when I first tried to run there, but my body wasn't ready. My mind was ready, but my body wasn't. And the second time I went there, and I remember I'd been sick for 2 weeks about, so I really didn't expect to be strong. And and I didn't force myself to run there. I simply was in the moment. I was in the reality. I was inside myself, not outside myself trying to get somewhere, just inside myself. And somehow I just flowed with that all the way to this pier. And I eventually ran under it. I ran beyond it as well. On my very last day, they actually put my arm around one of the pilings just to get a sense of, I don't know, just to feel the reality of the pier in a way. But it kind of had a bit of a symbolic meaning for me in a weird way. That it was this thing that I couldn't reach, and ultimately it was a thing that I reached effortlessly after that. And I think life is sometimes like that, right? Okay, I think there are two more images I can share with you. That's 10. I think this is another one. just again, what I'm trying to capture is the light. And obviously I had my camera virtually at the level of the ground, right? And again, just look how beautiful the sun is touching the tips of the grass, touching the edges of the windows here, the window frames, right? And look at those clouds, like a painting. And what I love about this picture is how you have this furnace at the end of the road. The road is going straight in the direction. Again, it's an orange line, kind of like feels a bit like Team Peachtree colors, but the road is taking you to this fiery destination, right? And look how beautiful the colors and the clouds are up here. How beautiful that is. It's like art, right? And that's something I really like is photography as art. Look how beautiful these clouds are. I mean, that could almost be a book cover, right? Or a movie poster. I mean, that's basically just crossing the road and stopping and going, that's actually really beautiful. And then I've got one more to show you. It's a kind of another version of what we saw earlier. That's 0611. I think it's this one. No, it's not that one. Well, I don't know. Have you guys seen this one? I must say, New York in the early morning is also quite special. The way the light hits the buildings, but that's not really what I wanted to show you guys. Where is it? Let me just see if I can find it. There it is. It's also just the clouds breaking through the light. So look how orange all of this is, but again, it's this effect right over here. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you found it interesting. There are a lot more photos. There's also video. If you guys aren't following me on Instagram, there's some really beautiful pictures I put up there. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of pictures that I need to put somewhere. But yeah, definitely quite something. You know, no matter what you're going through in your life, you can stop and watch a sunrise or a sunset. No matter what you're going through in your life, you can observe the now, the simple things like the wind through trees, the birds singing. Every day that I got up, I saw squirrels running across the road and birds that I'd never seen before doing their thing. And it's such a joy, you know, to take joy in simple things, to take joy in just the simple unfolding of a day somewhere is really quite magical. Today, as a family, when we went and ate somewhere, and while we were doing it, a pretty little girl, probably like 6 years old or something, maybe even younger, 5, 6 years old, started to pat Timmy, and then the next thing pulled out like a sketch pad and started drawing Timmy, and drew this very simple picture of Timmy. And I kind of looked back at her, and she's over there, and my brother's next to her, and my brother's a full-time artist. And I said to her, you should ask him for some tips. This is someone who paints for a living. And then she drew this picture of Timmy, and I actually took a photo of it. It was actually quite a sweet little moment, quite unexpected. Timmy got his portrait taken. Anyway, that's it from me. I hope you guys have found this worthwhile. We'll continue our movement through May. Remember, we're trying to get to Starry Night, and Starry Night actually happens in June. It's actually incredible that Starry Night is painted in the middle of such terrible crisis and suffering and adversity. And I think it gives you, when you know the depths of despair Van Gogh was going in, I think it actually gives you a different sense of what Starry Night, what the artist was trying to communicate, and what we, the audience, take from it. Because I don't think it's the same thing. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot for being here. I'm glad you feel that way. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, guys, for the super chats. I'll try and do this again in about 2 days, 2 or 3 days. So I'm going to try and do. I want to get through June before the end of June. So there's not that much of June left. So that's really the plan. So I'm going to be back doing this later this week, and then probably also this weekend, maybe Sunday or something. So that's what's going to happen. It is quite an exciting, if kind of terrifying, period that he's going through, and I hope you'll join me as we go through the next phase of it. Him going to the asylum in early May. And we'll be dealing with that in episode 82. I hope you'll join me. Robbie, Robin, Daria, Chelsea, thanks a lot for manning the fort. Jody, everyone who's here, thanks for listening. I'm about to post episode 9. I was sort of in the process of doing it, and so I'm going to be doing it right now. So please go from here to there. It should be up immediately after this live stream ends, so go and check that out. I think it's also going to be a fascinating watch, the way that I've mixed all of that up. Should be quite interesting. Interrextualities. Okay. Timmy, come here. Timmy, come. We need to end this live with a... Come, boy, with a cameo. Can you hear that? It's like yawn moaning. Timmy, come, boy. Come, let's go for a walk. Come, boy. Come. Okay. So Timmy went for a nice walk this afternoon, and he had a close encounter with a chicken, a rooster, got him quite excited, and even a black cat had the temerity to pass very close to him, and Timmy couldn't believe his luck. So he had quite an exciting day. So anyway, Timmy says good night, sweet dreams, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care. Cheers, guys.